the end of 2023, and that means everyone is doing their top 10 lists of their favourite and least favourite movies of the year. And it's something I've done for a number of years as well, and I've always kind of struggled with how to kind of approach it, really. So this year, effectively, I've decided to do it just B-movies. Just B-movies or kind of independent horror films. Because, to be honest, I feel putting like low-budget indie movies in the same category as mainstream movies, either on Blockbuster or streaming services, is not really an apples to apples comparison, and it's like I kind of grade them with that in mind as well. So I've decided I'm just going to do it with kind of like B movies, effectively, to kind of make it a more consistent list. So you're not going to see mainstream films on this list. Now, this being the worst list, I will preface this by saying all of the films on this list are very low budget. And as such, you know, they do all struggle with budgetary constraints. Now, the reason they're on this list, though, is because I feel the problems with them could have been something which could have been overcome, maybe without, you know, a higher budget necessarily. There's other problems here outside of budgetary issues, albeit I do feel obviously a lack of budget will generally kind of go a long way into some of the problems in these films, but there are low budget films on my top 10 list as well. So let's kind of get on to it. One final thing is this, the worst list, so to speak, is actually far more difficult to do than the top list, because the top list, I really remember those films. They have stuck with me. The bottom list, I barely remember these films, to be brutally honest with you. It took me ages, and I had to go back and watch my reviews and think, I don't remember what happened in this film because they were so bad. And I've just kind of forgotten about them. So it's a harder list to do for me because I watch so many films, and you know, these kind of low budget ones, you watch them and God, terrible, and you know, I'm kind of rating them on a not great rating, and then I just forget about them. So I have to go back and re-watch some of my reviews to remind myself. Anyway, let's get on with it. Coming in at number 10 is a movie called Dark Entities, and I rated this a 3 out of 10. And effectively, it's a kind of, it takes the broad story of The Conjuring, the first Conjuring movie, it kind of remakes it. But it seems pointless to make, kind of obviously remake a high budget movie in a kind of a rip-off low budget version. I mean, what's the point? It's poorly put together. There's really kind of no VFX in the film. It's ultimately comes across as, you know, never ever a scary film, and never kind of all that kind of visually interesting, and ultimately a real kind of poor copy of another more successful film. And it's like, if you're not going to introduce anything new to it, then why bother doing it in the first place? So that was Dark Entities. Number 9 is a movie called Trinket Boxes, I believe was a straight-to-Tubi film. And this was effectively about a couple that kind of move into a house, and they're a mixed race couple, and you know, there's kind of racial overtones in the film as well. Effectively, it's a cursed object movie, but it's really dull. It is dull and ultimately a little convoluted in regards to its kind of plot, a plodding pace, and not brilliant in any kind of sense of the words, to be honest with you. So yeah, the Trinket Box was a little bit of a tough watch, a 3 out of 10. Number 8, I would argue, is probably the most high-profile film in this bunch. And when you see this, you're thinking, that's high-profile? But to me, this is kind of the highest-profile one. And this is Fog City, directed by Steve Walsh, who did Muck and Kill Her Goats, I think it's called. So this movie, I actually think, was made before Kill Her Goats, but it came out afterwards. And it tries to be this kind of psychological horror film where we have these kind of young people, young yuppies, unlikable kind of rich kids, all kind of trapped in this house with this mysterious kind of fog, which they think is toxic. Is it? You have to watch the film and find out. But effectively, it's trying to ask the question, you know, about the way that kind of we as humans effectively panic and kind of just create problems for ourselves. It is so obvious that what is happening. It's, you know, it's just like you can see right from the kind of the first like 15 minutes what's going to happen in this movie. There's no effort to kind of try and do anything different. I think the movie thinks, haha, we're going to have this reveal, but it's like so obvious what the reveal is. And it's just overdone. These people argue and fight and kind of make problems for each other in such overactive, you know, they're just, it's overdone. And the dialogue is horrible and unkind of realistic. It's well filmed, but it's just the actual content of the story is just overbaked. It's not believable. The dialogue is horrible, and it's extraordinarily obvious about what's happening. So it's a disappointment. So that is Fog City at number 8, which I rated 3 out of 10. Number 7 is Werewolf Santa, which is actually one of the more recent movies I have watched and reviewed, which is why I'm going to do in this list a little later. I also reviewed this, gave it 3 out of 10, and this, like, it's one of these cases where the DVD poster art looks incredible and the movie is nothing like that. I mean, the werewolf in this movie is literally looks like a shop-bought kind of cheap Halloween mask. It's ridiculously rubbish. The acting is extraordinarily poor, and it's, you know, it has a couple of like, it's basically a horror comedy, and it's kind of a couple of okay moments where, you know, we have this kind of Santa getting attacked by a werewolf. It's kind of a found footage aesthetic, but it's like, with found footage, the idea being is that it has this degree of believability. So when you take that away from a found footage movie, what are you left with? It's just, unfortunately, the concept is fun, but the execution is poor. And again, this is one where really, I think the low budget didn't help this one, but it's just poorly done, and the execution of this idea was just not good, unfortunately. So that is Werewolf Santa. Which was a 3 out of 10. Number 6 is Cocaine Shark. Arguably, maybe not a horror film, but it's the only one really which you could argue is maybe not a horror film, and I'm not changing my title just for this one. Now, you might be familiar with the director here, MANIA. Very much kind of churns out these kind of cheap B movies. And this one was obviously in response to Cocaine Bear, which was a high budget movie. But this one, it feels like they had an opportunity to do a similar story, and there was reports of kind of like drugs being dropped in the ocean, and, you know, could this be like a real life cocaine shark? The movie's nothing to do with A, cocaine, and B, sharks. It's basically got this crab monster which has been genetically modified and kind of is swimming around, but it's mostly like human bad guys, and it's mega cheap, stylistically bad. And as I say, there is actually a movie which came out, which the name escapes me, which is actually more like a cocaine shark, although that concept was weighted on that one as well. So yeah, this is just like crappy stop motion monsters with crappy acting. If you're familiar with MANIA movies, you'll know exactly what you're getting in for it. But the Professional Amateur Hour generally reviews these ones. So this is one I picked, however, and yeah, it wasn't good. 3 out of 10. Let's move on. Next up we have number 5, The Wendigo. And this is again another found footage movie, which there's basically a YouTuber who's investigating some sort of cryptid, and he goes missing, so all his friends kind of end up trying to kind of like do their own kind of like vlogs and stuff to find out what's happened. It's effectively a movie about people arguing. The reveal of the creature is thoroughly disappointing, and it's unfortunately it looks like a bunch of friends have just got together and kind of filmed this and without really much skill or experience, and and have kind of slapped this movie together, and it's not interesting. I think the intro with the kind of the YouTuber guy is probably the best bit, and then after that it kind of goes downhill pretty fast. So I rate this one again a 3 out of 10. Number 4, we have 3 Blind Mice, and this one is produced by Scott Jeffrey, he who produces many movies that we have reviewed on this channel, notably the Winnie the Pooh Blood and Honey, which for some reason has got a load of people liking it. I don't know why, but that was crap. But you know, that had a slightly higher budget, so I think it visually was a little bit more interesting. I will admit, when I reviewed this one, I had full-on COVID, so I was a little bit grumpy in this review. But it was just like they produce films so quickly in this kind of Jagged Edge production studios. They're all the same. It's a bunch of girls going into some type of building, getting chased around by some guy in a mask or some monster with a guy in a mask, getting killed off until there's one left. It's the same film every time, with very little in regards to kind of like a gore. Just so predictable. I wish they would produce less films and just took a little bit more time. It's just so run-of-the-mill. 3 Blind Mice, yeah, it was just so generic, so bland. 3 out of 10. Number 3, this was called The Unseen, and is effective. It stars R.J. Maita, who you may know from Breaking Bad, and Rebecca Kennedy, who is very good in The Two Witches, which was an Arrow release. This one is effectively a kind of a mystery, but it's so poorly kind of put together and incoherent. You just don't care. Things are kind of just unexplained. It doesn't really make sense. Again, this is one where I'm struggling to like remember what my critiques were, to be honest, but I know I rated this quite bad. And it was just a hard movie to sit through. I spoke to someone else and another review, and they said they couldn't even finish it. And I did finish it, and it was not very good. Little in regards to kind of VFX, plot holes. It was just not a fun film. Not a fun film. Very dull. And again, I rated this one 3 out of 10. Number 2, and this is a film I have to say I feel a little bad for, because this was the director's first attempt at making a film. And it was a swing and it was a miss. But I feel kind of bad because I just think, again, it's probably down to a lot of lack of experience. But we are talking Hollis, and I rated this one a 2 out of 10. And it's effectively about 2 couples that end up in the same kind of like Airbnb style kind of resorts, and they end up kind of deciding to share it. But they think there's some type of entity outside, and it could be like a siren. And it's one of these films where they have this twist which completely destroys the rest of the film in regards to logic. And then there's hidden agendas and things like that, but they have this kind of twist, and they're thinking that now completely doesn't make sense to what you've said in like the rest of the film, and it went really wrong, and it's just a little bit of a dull film. The kind of like when we do see the let's call it antagonists on screen, it's laughably bad, which is something I'm going to say about my number 1 pick as well. And it's just unfortunately a relatively kind of like mediocre drama up until the kind of the end, where it completely fumbles the kind of the landing and then destroys the kind of the plot there, you know, for the rest of the movie. So this needed to have more eyes on it ultimately. So this one I gave it a 2 out of 10 because it was yeah, the execution was poor. But hopefully, you know, the filmmakers will come back and maybe kind of have a little bit more kind of thought into the next film. My number 1 pick was a Michael Madsen starring film called The Wraith Within, which I also rated 2 out of 10. And again, it's difficult to remember this film too much, but I know I had literally nothing to good could say about this film, and it's about a kind of I believe it's like a cursed item again, and it's kind of like curses following this group of young adults and teens and etc. And it's like this ghoul woman who has got this ridiculous like white wig, which looks like a kind of like a cheap wig that you'd buy for like a couple of bucks in a shop, and it's awful, and it just is rubbish. The acting is terrible. The storyline is just like nothing you haven't seen before, and it's just a really bad. Michael Madsen just looks weird in this film. He's got no eyebrows. He looks like he's just woken up, and he's not. He doesn't have a huge part. It's just a stupid film that is just boring, and when we do see stuff, it's incredibly crappy. And yeah, again, it's just a very cheaply produced, knock it out movie. Now, a lot of you probably haven't even heard a lot of these films, I've no doubt, but there you go. So that's why this list is probably different to any other list you're going to see. And again, I'll say all these movies, maybe with the exception of Fog City, are very, very, very low budget. So, you know, these are just my personal picks. Don't mean it's any like personal attacks or any of the filmmakers or anything like that. I understand there's low budgets, and this basically kind of affects the kind of like the production. It's a quick turnaround, and I'm sure in some instances they were trying their best, but in some instances, let's be honest, they weren't. But there you go. So hopefully all these filmmakers will go on to make better films, which I'll enjoy. What did you think about this list? Any films on here that you have seen? And what were your thoughts on any? And do you disagree with any of my choices? Did you like any of these movies? I barely remember them. I'm not going to lie. Anyway, please do let me know, and I shall look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.